There's never a day that goes by that net zero isn't somewhere on someone's agenda. And it's recently been a COP something or the other over in Azerbaijan. And today we learned that Britain is going to ban coal mines under Miliband's net zero plans. The government's going to bring forward a decision to restrict new licences, ending an era of coal-fired power generation that at its peak supported more than 1 million jobs. It follows the closure of the last UK coal power station in September, ending 142 years of coal-fired generation. The big problem with this, though, is what we do about our steel industry. And we're probably going to now have to import coal from Russia and China instead. Is this really the best foot forward? Well, let's speak now to Ed Gemmell, who is the leader of the Climate Party. Ed, I'm guessing you probably welcome this news, but there'll be people out there, especially people in South Wales whose jobs depend upon steel, that are going to be quite worried about what this means for their industries.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it's fantastic news. I mean, let's get Britain ahead of everybody else. Let's start taking advantage of what's coming. Obviously, for people that are in the industry, that's very worrying, but let's get the transition done now, and let's do it so that we're not the last in the line to do it. I mean, the unions, Unite and others have been out saying, let's get the transition done. Let's actually make the transition in terms of jobs, and let's make sure there's guarantees there. What this does now is it avoids the uncertainty. It's going, guys. Don't think that you can delay it anymore. Start transitioning, make the best of it.
I mean, the problem is, though, it's going from the United Kingdom, but it's not going all together, because we're going to have to turn to countries such as China and Russia to import this, to essentially guide us through this transition. Geopolitically, I don't feel like it's the right move to be putting money in the pockets of the Kremlin or Beijing.
I mean, totally agree with you, but that's also partly because we haven't transitioned our industry, you know, because we haven't transitioned quickly enough steel making, we haven't transitioned, or we aren't transitioning quickly enough concrete making, and all these other things that have been using coal-fired power stations. Oh, sorry, we've transitioned coal-fired power stations, but we haven't transitioned the industrial processes. So we need to be transitioning those quickly, and we're actually losing out. Look, there's many other countries around the world that are transitioning in these areas that are now grabbing the market. I mean, a very good example is Port Talbot. Okay, we're moving away from the coal-fire power state, the coal-fire there for the blast furnace into an electric arc furnace. But that's only a recycling plant. Whereas what they're doing in Sweden, they're moving straight on to decarbonised steel. H2 Steel, for the same amount of investment as we're putting into our recycling plant for steel, they're building a completely decarbonised steel plant that is already taking contracts all around Europe, and it's only launching next year. If we were doing that, we wouldn't be needing the coal at all.
Is there not a concern, though, that actually the people who are winning at this game when it comes to net zero are countries like China, who frankly don't really care about their carbon emissions, and CO2 doesn't really understand sort of national boundaries in the sky of where it floats and what it does to the atmosphere? And yet, when you look at the production of EVs, when you look at the production of solar panels, batteries, you name it, that China's got the upper hand because they basically now control 99% of rare earth minerals, which personally, I think we should be finding in our own country. I think some of those might exist under the green and rolling hills of England. But we're essentially almost writing a giant charity cheque to China to say, you take on our carbon emissions, you pump what you like out, you get the upper hand when it comes to industrial development, and while we'll self-flagellate and make our own economies poorer and weaker.
Well, except the self-flagellation bit, I think we're probably in agreement on a lot of this, actually. I mean, look, since the 1970s, we had nearly a third of our economy came from manufacturing and industry, and we've outsourced it. We've lost it. And with that, of course, carbon emissions, ultimately, as we get in the last few decades. We're now under 10% of our economy comes from manufacturing. We need to ramp it up. China is making all the stuff for net zero at the moment, but we should be there. We should be out at the front. We can see the writings on the wall. 93% of world GDP is now under a net zero commitment. That's up from 87% at the last COP. That is where everyone's going. The train's left the station, and we've got two choices. We can either be at the front, driving it and taking the fares, or we can sit in the back and start paying everybody else for it. And currently, you're right, we're paying China.
Does that not involve what a lot of climate activists might think of as a retrograde step, though? Because China is largely using fossil-powered power stations to make the net zero products. Would it potentially have been a good idea for us to seek to do the same, to potentially, yes, it might have been a ghastly idea to climate activists, but say cash in on something like shale gas in order to be the thing that turbocharges the development and make sure the green industry was creating green jobs in the UK? Is it not fighting with one hand tied behind your back, essentially?
I don't think so. I think what we do is open our eyes to the enormous opportunity. And remember that although they're opening coal-fired power stations at the moment in China, they're doing 7 times in terms of the amount of energy they're producing from renewables. So they're doing 7 times the renewables what they're doing in terms of new coal-fired power stations. So they're actually doing both at the same time. And we always talk about their coal-fired power stations, which they're opening, of course, to make the wind turbines and solar panels and ship them over to us.
Couldn't we have done the same? Wouldn't that have made more sense? Because then we're creating the green jobs that we were promised the green revolution would bring, and those jobs seem to be happening in China. And I just wonder if we were prepared to take a retrograde step before we run and leap forward. That would have been good for industry in this country, good for the economy, and then we really would be leading from the front and not handing that responsibility over to China, who I sometimes question their motivations.
Well, I think we all question their motivations. I mean, they're out there in it to make the money, and I think maybe we should be focusing on that a bit more. The would-have, could-haves, if we'd been talking 20 years ago, I think we may well have agreed on this point again. Right now, it's really obvious what's happening. Everyone's going there. We should be bringing forward our net zero commitments, driving that private financing in front of government finance.
So how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that's financially sustainable? Because what we keep hearing time again is the cost for net zero is so high that the Labour government have had to sort of welsh on a lot of their ambitions when it comes to actually looking at how much this is going to set us back financially. That's the problem here, isn't it? We haven't found a way to do this to stimulate growth in our economy. It punishes the ordinary man and woman, really. It ends up on their bills.
I think what we've seen today on coal, just to go back to the original thing, a bit of certainty coming in. It's definitely going, so let's start moving now. Now, what we need to do on net zero is not talk about all the rubbish of 2050. Let's bring forward those targets and do it a lot earlier so we really lead in the world. Look, we're already committed to almost 70% by 2030, 81% in 2035. 1 second. And what we could be doing is bring forward the targets to 100%. The whole economy going there together, not people fighting to stay in the bit that we're not decarbonising. Get everybody focused on it and drive the private money in front of government money. Because if the entire economy was going there in 2030 or 2035, every business at the moment that was in circularity, sustainability, renewables, all of those enabling businesses to get us there be worth 1,000 times what they are today. Private money would pile into them to get them there. Nuclear fusion, we've never really concentrated on it. Yes, it might not work, but let's put the money in and find out. And we need to drive the private money first, not rely on government, which it's very bad at doing, is cherry picking where to put bits of subsidy and tax breaks and things in order to encourage private money. Let the private money get at it. Give them certainty.
Do you know, there's something you said there that I totally agree with. I've got friends who work in the business of SMRs, small modular reactors, in the nuclear field, and Rolls-Royce has really been leading the way in developing this technology. My word, wouldn't the Chinese like to know how to do it? My word, wouldn't even the French like to know how to do it? We've become a world leader, and America is looking at Britain going, wow, this is fascinating. We should work alongside the Brits to roll out this technology. The problem is what these people have been faced with every single step of the way for years now. I've been speaking to them since the middle of COVID. Is government departments that just aren't interested.
Look, you're completely right. I'm personally not a lover of nuclear, but it's everything, everywhere, all at once, both economically and in terms of net zero. Everything we can get done before 2030, put it in. And if we brought forward our targets, that part of the nuclear industry would be getting vastly more attention. Their investments would be vastly more returning, and it would be accelerating it so that we'd be exporting that technology to everybody else in the world. That's what we need to do in all of the areas. And in areas that we haven't exploited at the moment, tidal power. We're surrounded by water. Government studies showing we can do 20 gigawatts of power from tide, which is totally predictable, unlike solar and wind. And at the peak of it, at 20 gigawatts, that would be doing half of our power as we sit here today.
Tidal power, what is that sort of in the River Severn?
River Severn is an individual project that would actually be great. But you've got 2 types of tidal power, where the water goes up and down, so it moves it up and down, and that's where you get the power, and when it goes in and out. So you've got tidal stream. And if we were doing those, we would be leading the world. Not only do we have 60% of Europe's potential for tidal power, but we'd be exporting all the technology, all the systems, and all the operational expertise to everywhere else in the world for decades to come.
You're quite infectious, Ed. I'm beginning to become a greenie listening to you, although you'll never convince me on the Severn barrage. I come from Gloucester and we're worried about flooding and eels. And you know what it's like when it comes to great crested newts and elvers and things like that. You can't ruin their lives. Right, Ed Gemmell, thank you ever so much. Honestly, I've really enjoyed talking to you, leader of the Climate Party.